UPS plane crash.
UPS plane crash.
The UPS plane crash.
The UPS plane crash in Kentucky. The death toll has now climbed to at least 12 as officials search for answers.
On November 4th, 2025, at approximately 5:13 p.m. Eastern Time, the cargo aircraft operating UPS Airlines Flight 2976 lifted off from Louisville Muhammad Ali International Airport SDF in Kentucky, bound for Honolulu, Hawaii. The aircraft was a 3-engine freighter, a McDonnell Douglas MD-11F registered N259UP, which had entered service originally in 1991 and later converted for cargo operations. This flight, however, would end in disaster mere seconds after takeoff, a sequence so rapid and devastating that it left a scar across the surrounding industrial zone and shocked the aviation world. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The routine-sounding details belie the speed and intensity of what would follow. The aircraft had been cleared for takeoff on runway 17R at SDF under apparently normal weather conditions. Visibility was good and winds modest. As the MD-11 accelerated down the runway, tracking data show it reached a ground speed around 186 knots and a height of about 175 feet before things catastrophically unraveled. Just before the aircraft left the runway surface, the entire left engine, the number 1 engine, mounted on the left wing pylon, separated from the wing structure. The detached engine component was later found beside the runway. Video evidence captured by surveillance cameras shows the wing of the aircraft already showing visible fire and flame as the ascent began, a horrifying signal that things were already out of control. At this altitude and speed, a cargo jet such as this is still in a critically vulnerable phase. The obligations to climb safely, gear up, accelerate, and gain altitude all in quick succession. The detachment of a major engine in that moment is about as serious a condition as one can imagine during takeoff. With the left engine gone, the aircraft banked sharply to the left wing began to burn, and control became increasingly compromised. The bank angle exceeded 90 degrees, leaving the MD-11 inverted or nearly so as it descended toward the industrial complex just beyond the airport perimeter. The crew, according to the investigation team of the National Transportation Safety Board (NTSB), made attempts to steer and stabilize the aircraft, but with a major propulsion failure, structural damage, and fire, the task became nearly impossible. The crash site was located just off the airfield in the industrial zone of Louisville, Kentucky. The aircraft struck multiple structures. First, it impacted the roof of a warehouse facility operated by the carrier itself, UPS supply chain, causing a large gash of about 90 m across the roof. The left wing then collided with fuel storage tanks belonging to a petroleum recycling business, Kentucky Petroleum Recycling, triggering a massive fire. Debris was strewn across approximately half a mile of ground. The final resting place of the aircraft came to a halt near a truck parking lot and an auto salvage yard, Grade A auto parts. Investigators later determined the aircraft was loaded with about 38,000 gallons of fuel for the trans-Pacific flight to Honolulu, and importantly, was not carrying hazardous cargo. Though the fuel alone was enough to create the monstrous smoke plume and fireball that followed. The crash resulted not only in the loss of the 3 crew members aboard, but also in the deaths of 11 people on the ground, making the total known fatalities 14. Numerous others on the ground were injured, at least 15 people, and dozens of buildings were damaged or destroyed. Authorities swiftly issued a shelter-in-place order for a 5-mile radius around the crash site and closed the airport, evacuating and restricting access in the immediate aftermath. The N259UP aircraft had first flown as a passenger MD-11 with Thai Airways International in 1991. Then in 2006 was converted to a freighter and delivered to the operator. At 34 years of age, the airframe was well old for a commercial aircraft, though cargo operators routinely fly older types. What raised eyebrows was that only months before the accident, the aircraft had been grounded for 6 weeks in San Antonio for fuel tank crack repair, and was later found to have structural corrosion on 2 fuselage beams. Questions naturally emerge when a vintage aircraft with recent maintenance issues suffers a catastrophic failure. The MD-11 had 3 General Electric CF680C2D1F engines, one under each wing and one tail-mounted. The removal of one such engine during takeoff is rare and extremely dangerous. The legacy of the MD-11 also brings memories of the earlier American Airlines Flight 191 crash of 1979 ADC-10. The MD-11's predecessor, which likewise lost its left engine during takeoff, though that accident was a passenger flight. A flight crew of 3 operated this cargo flight. Captain Richard Wartenberg, 57, a retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, First Officer Lee Truitt, 45, and Relief Officer / Captain Dana Diamond, 62. All 3 lost their lives in the crash. On the ground, victims included employees of the vehicle's salvage yard, recycling facility workers, and local community members. In some cases, families who were simply nearby when disaster struck. The local community in Louisville reacted with shock and mourning. Flags were flown at half-staff, business and union vigils were held, and the landmark Big Four Bridge over the Ohio River was illuminated in yellow in solidarity. First responders faced a chaotic scene: collapsed structures, widespread fires, hazardous fuel and debris. More than 100 firefighters arrived on scene shortly after the crash. The NTSB quickly dispatched a GO team of 28 investigators to the site. They recovered both the cockpit voice recorder CVR and flight data recorder FDR. According to NTSB member Todd Inman, the last ADSB message was received at 5 hours, 13 minutes, and 32 seconds PM UTC-5 and showed the aircraft at about 475 feet above sea level, approximately 100 feet above ground, when the final data was recorded. The CVR audio reportedly contained a persistent warning bell that sounded just 37 seconds after takeoff thrust was applied, and for the 25 seconds that followed, the crew fought to regain control of the aircraft. Investigators believe the initial catastrophic event was the separation of the left engine during the takeoff roll, which then may have caused debris ingestion or damage to other systems, including the tail-mounted third engine. The resulting loss of power, structural damage, and fire rapidly overwhelmed the aircraft's ability to sustain flight. The fact that the aircraft had undergone maintenance not long before the crash is also under scrutiny. Meanwhile, the Federal Aviation Administration FAA issued an Emergency Airworthiness Directive EAD grounding all MD-11 aircraft until certain inspections and corrective actions were completed. The crash's ripple effects extended beyond Louisville. The grounding of the MD-11 fleet by major cargo operators such as the carrier and its peers disrupted overnight freight operations at hubs across the United States. With packages delayed and supply chains stressed, the incident illustrated how a single aircraft failure could cascade into economic and logistical disruption. Regulators and industry commentators compared this tragedy with Flight 191 and other high-profile cargo aircraft accidents, underscoring the critical importance of design integrity, maintenance oversight, and failure mode resilience in aging aircraft fleets. Locally in Louisville, the crash also raised questions about airport-adjacent land use, emergency response capacity, and business continuity for the thousands of workers employed in the surrounding industrial zones. In the days immediately following the crash, the local authorities instituted shelter-in-place orders for residents within several miles, due to smoke and risk of explosion from ruptured fuel storage tanks. The operator issued a statement expressing condolences to the families of those killed and injured and affirmed its cooperation with the ongoing investigation. Across Louisville, mourners gathered at candlelight vigils. Union halls opened their doors to grieving employees and community members alike. Several factors combined to make this accident particularly dreadful. First, the detachment of a large engine during the takeoff roll is a rare and extremely dangerous failure mode. The left wing engine separation left the aircraft with reduced thrust, potential asymmetric drag, structural damage, and fire. Second, the aircraft's heavy fuel load, necessary for the long haul to Honolulu, meant that there was a vast amount of energy on board, and once the wing or fuel tanks were breached, the fire spread quickly. Third, the crash site was within an industrial complex adjacent to the runway, meaning that the aircraft impacted multiple structures and caused additional ground casualties. Fourth, the age and maintenance history of the aircraft raise important questions about inspection regimes and life cycle management. As of now, the full sequence of events remains subject to ongoing investigation. The NTSB has not yet released its final report, which will analyze the detachment mechanism of the engine, the maintenance history of the pylon and wing structure, the response timeline from the crew, and the aerodynamic consequences of the engine loss. It will also investigate whether any maintenance or inspection lapses occurred, or whether design factors played any role. The release of the full CVR transcript and FDR analysis is expected in the coming months. The investigator's job will be to not only determine what went wrong, but also why it went wrong, and what lessons must be learned to prevent a repeat. From this tragedy, several lessons become clear. One is the importance of maintenance oversight on older aircraft. Even though cargo operators routinely fly older types, structural and engine pylon integrity cannot be taken for granted. Another is the critical nature of redundancy and resilience. When a major thrust element is lost during takeoff, the aircraft is in one of the most vulnerable phases of flight, and the margin for error is minimal. Third, land use around airports and emergency response readiness for catastrophic fuel-related events matter significantly. Having an industrial complex downwind of a crash zone introduces ground risk factors beyond the crew alone. Fourth, industry regulators must consider the cumulative risk posed by aging fleets, high fuel loads, and industrial adjacency. The crash of Flight 2976 has marked the deadliest accident in the history of the carrier. The community of Louisville has been left grappling with loss, cleanup, and questions. The families of the crew and ground victims are mourning. Investigators work painstakingly through the charred wreckage, the flight data recordings, the shards of evidence to construct the story of what happened. Yet within that sober work lies the hope that aviation will learn, adapt, and evolve. For each such tragic event, the cost is measured in human lives, but the goal is always to ensure that the same sequence does not repeat elsewhere. As the investigation moves forward, the world watches, for not just answers about one flight, but for insights that may save lives in the future. As the cargo jet began its ascent from Louisville Muhammad Ali International Airport, the crew likely believed they were executing a routine departure. But within seconds of leaving the ground, the aircraft encountered catastrophic failure that offered the pilots almost no margin for corrective action. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board (NTSB) noted that a repeating warning bell sounded some 37 seconds after takeoff thrust was set. This bell persisted for approximately 25 seconds until impact, signaling an urgent emergency condition unfolding in the cockpit. According to data reviewed by the investigators, at the moment of separation of the engine, the aircraft was barely above ground level, between about 100 feet and 175 feet altitude, and traveling around 180-190 knots. Because the event occurred during takeoff, a phase of flight with very little time and limited options, the crew faced an almost impossible challenge. The left engine, the number one engine on the left wing, detached during the takeoff roll, leaving that wing devoid of its major thrust and structural support. The separation of an engine from a wing does not merely reduce thrust. It creates asymmetric thrust, major drag, potential damage to adjacent systems' hydraulics, wiring, structure, and risk of fuel leakage or fire. In this accident, after liftoff, observers captured video showing fire already emanating from the left wing area. That indicates that the structural failure had progressed into thermal effects extremely quickly. As the wing burned and the loss of the engine induced a large bank to the left, control diminished rapidly. As the bank steepened beyond 90 degrees, the aircraft lost lift. It struck a warehouse roof, then a stand of fuel tanks at a nearby petroleum recycling facility, before finally crashing among trucks and auto parts salvage yards. The heavy fuel load on board, required for the long haul from Louisville to Honolulu, amplified the severity. One report estimated that about 38,000 gallons, or roughly 220,000 pounds of fuel, were on board. The presence of that fuel and its rapid ignition created intense fire, large smoke plumes, and made the crash site even more dangerous for first responders. Rescue teams arrived swiftly, but the scene was complex and perilous. With major structures damaged, fuel tanks ruptured, and wreckage spreading across an industrial facility, the response required coordination across fire, hazmat, and rescue units. Officials placed a shelter-in-place order for a radius around the impact location due to risk of further explosions and toxic smoke. While the three-person crew had extraordinary experience, including military backgrounds and long tenures, Their options in the face of a major engine separation during takeoff were extremely limited. Investigators have emphasized that the last moments of the flight, captured in the cockpit voice recorder CVR and flight data recorder FDR, show them battling for control, repeatedly applying corrective inputs and attempting to arrest the bank. But the aircraft simply lacked sufficient aerodynamic and structural integrity to respond. In the wake of the crash, regulatory and operational reverberations were swift. The Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) issued an emergency airworthiness directive grounding all aircraft of the model type, the McDonnell Douglas MD-11 and its freighter variant, until inspections and corrective actions were completed. This precaution underscored the severity of the failure mode being investigated, an engine and pylon separation during takeoff. Similar structures in earlier aircraft, including the DC-10 family, were also temporarily grounded. The fact that the aircraft had entered service in 1991 and been converted to cargo operations in 2006 is not alone a cause, but raises the issue of fleet aging and life cycle maintenance in heavy freighters. The NTSB docket records note that the aircraft had recently undergone maintenance, including repair of a cracked fuel tank weeks earlier. Investigators are probing whether structural fatigue, corrosion, inadequate inspection, or material defects in the engine pylon or wing structure may have played a role in the separation. The parallels to the 1979 American Airlines Flight 191 crash, where a DC-10 lost its left engine during takeoff, have been drawn repeatedly in aviation safety commentary. The crash also exposed the downstream impact on neighboring communities. Businesses adjacent to the airport had heavy casualties. Some of the 11 people killed on the ground were in a salvage yard or nearby parking area. That raises important questions about land use planning near runways, how industrial sites adjacent to flight paths may increase ground victim risk in the event of an aircraft crash. Emergency planning for airports often assumes open fields or low-density surroundings. This accident challenged those assumptions. Operationally, the cargo airline faced enormous logistical disruption. The model type, comprising roughly 9% of the carrier's fleet and similar percentages at other carriers being grounded, meant significant overnight freight volume had to be rerouted or delayed. The grounding caused supply chain ripple effects, especially as the accident occurred during the late autumn rush. Legally, the crash triggered immediate lawsuits. Residents and business owners near the crash site claimed property damage, smoke inhalation injuries, and business interruption. One major law firm filed claims against the carrier, the aircraft manufacturer, and the engine maker, alleging negligence and design defect in the pylon engine assembly. As the investigation continues, these legal actions may influence settlement decisions and future regulatory policies. From a human perspective, the local community in Louisville felt the impact deeply. The airport and surrounding industrial corridor are significant employers. The disaster shook the sense of safety in what had been viewed as a well-managed aviation hub. Vigils, memorials, and public remembrances multiplied. The bridge across the Ohio River was lit in the company's colors as an expression of solidarity. First responders described the scene as apocalyptic, with fireballs, debris raining, and structural collapse of adjacent warehouses. Investigative focus is now narrowing into three interlinked streams: structural maintenance integrity of the engine pylon wing interface, the sequence of the crew's decision-making and aircraft performance after the engine separation, and ambient environmental factors: fuel load, takeoff weight, aircraft configuration that converted a mechanical failure into a catastrophe. The NTSB's goal is not only to identify the initiating event, but to understand how and why the failure unfolded so rapidly that it could not be recovered. The agency emphasizes that the investigation's final report may take up to 24 months. Among the intriguing technical questions is the condition of the left engine mount and pylon attachments. On large freighters, high cycle loading, fatigue, corrosion, and repairs all can weaken load paths. If the pylon fails, then the attached engine may detach, a most serious event. Investigators are examining past maintenance history, inspection records, and repair documentation to trace whether any cracks or corrosion existed in that structure before flight. In addition, examination of video footage and debris patterns will help determine whether the engine separation occurred before takeoff roll or during, and whether the crew had time to recognize engine loss prior to liftoff. Some early video suggests the engine detached during the ground roll before liftoff. Another substantial area under investigation involves the tail-mounted third engine. The number 2 engine on an MD-11 sits in the tail. Some eyewitness reports and video indicate flames issuing from that engine shortly before or during climb. It is possible that debris from the detached left engine, or shock waves created by its separation, damaged the tail engine and precipitated a second failure. That in turn may have exacerbated thrust asymmetry, made control impossible, and accelerated the flight's downward spiral. Confirming that mode of failure requires detailed inspection of the damaged tail engine components and matching flight data parameters showing sudden thrust changes. The NTSB has already retrieved the FDR and CVR and extracted data, though not yet public. Because the aircraft was loaded fully for a long-haul flight, its takeoff weight was very high. That means performance margins for climb were thinner. Climbing out, gear up, flap retract, accelerate, and attain a safe control margin. All needed to occur in rapid sequence. Any impairment of thrust or lift in that context magnifies risk. Investigators will model the exact weight, flap setting, engine out performance, and the effect of the missing engine to determine whether the aircraft was above its certified engine out climb gradient and how much margin remained. The preliminary data show the aircraft failed to establish a positive climb. According to NTSB remarks, it reached about 100 feet altitude, then began to bank and descend. Fire behavior post-impact is also studied. Investigators examine how the fuel load, structural damage on the wing, ruptured fuel tanks, and proximity to fuel storage facilities contributed to the scale of the fire. That matters because beyond the crew fatalities, the ground fatalities and injuries were largely due to secondary effects. Buildings ignited, fuel tanks exploded, debris penetrated structures. By assessing the fire spread, first responder arrival times, evacuation protocols for the industrial site, and how the crash threatened adjacent businesses, safety experts will develop recommendations for mitigation of ground risk around airports. Satellite imagery released after the crash showed a long gash across a warehouse roof about 295 feet and the large burn scar around the petroleum recycling site. From a broader strategic angle, this accident highlights aging aircraft in cargo fleets. The MD-11 series ceased production in 2000, and many in cargo service accumulate very high hours and cycles. Airlines often keep them for cost reasons because they are freighters, and cargo operations tolerate higher age than passenger services. But the risk of structural fatigue, unexpected corrosion, and unanticipated interactions between old structures and maintenance interventions rise with age. Safety analysts are cautioned that older aircraft are not automatically unsafe, but require rigorous life cycle management, frequent inspections oriented toward fatigue-susceptible areas, and awareness of post-conversion load changes. In this case, the aircraft's previous maintenance history of a cracked fuel tank and corrosion detection raises questions about whether other structural areas may have been stressed or compromised. The engineering of the pylon-wing engine interface is also under renewed scrutiny. In large tri-jets like the MD-11, the wing-mounted engines carry not only thrust and weight, but also transmit structural bending and load into the wing and pylon structures. An engine separation event is one of the most severe structural failures possible. Following the 1979 Flight 191 crash, a DC-10 also lost its left engine during takeoff. Design changes were instituted in that family of aircraft. The occurrence of a similar event today suggests that either a flaw in a particular component has emerged, or that maintenance and inspection regimes may have not caught a weakness. Aviation manufacturers, regulators, and operators will be keenly watching the NTSB's recommendations. For example, whether additional inspection intervals for pylon attachments or engine mounts will be required, whether specific aging aircraft fatigue management programs need revision, and whether cargo airlines must reassess the economics of extending life of older jets. As the investigation continues, several provisional lessons have been raised. Among them, the importance of recognition of engine separation at takeoff, a moment of extreme vulnerability, the necessity that takeoff decision speeds V1, VR, and subsequent climb performance be conservatively margin-ed when heavy fuel loads are carried, the need for rigorous inspection of historically problematic structures, engine pylons, wing attachments, especially in aging freighters, the value of considering ground risk in airport planning, especially for cargo hubs located in industrial zones, and the need for emergency response planning that addresses worst-case scenarios with fuel-rich aircraft crashing into fuel-adjacent facilities. There are also broader aviation industry implications. Air cargo operations have grown significantly over the past decade, with older wide-body freighters often used because of cost advantages. But as fleets age, regulatory oversight must evolve. The carriers may face increasing pressure to retire older models earlier or invest in enhanced structural monitoring, non-destructive inspection techniques, and life cycle fatigue tracking. For airports with major cargo hubs, this accident serves as a reminder that industrial sprawl into adjacent land parcels needs careful risk assessment. Some future mitigation may involve buffer zones, more stringent land use controls, or enhanced firefighting rescue infrastructure at facilities that border runways. In the immediate term, the grounding of the MD-11 fleet has forced cargo carriers to shuffle aircraft and capacity. While this accident will impact the supply chain temporarily, the long-term effect may include accelerated retirement of the MD-11 type, increased insurance costs for older freighters, and possibly fleet renewal initiatives. Indeed, carriers may revisit the economics of keeping older tri-jets in service versus acquiring newer twin-engine heavy freighters which benefit from better fuel efficiency, lower maintenance, and improved reliability. On the regulatory front, the FAA and NTSB are likely to explore whether the existing airworthiness directives and inspection schedules for the MD-11 and its predecessor families, including the DC-10, are adequate for the current age and usage profiles. Watch points may include pylon engine assembly inspection intervals, corrosion management programs, load spectrum monitoring for high-cycle freighter operations, and enhanced monitoring for takeoff roll structural health. The fact that the NTSB investigation is categorized under docket DCA 26MA024 signals that it is full-scale and likely to yield substantive industry-wide recommendations. Community resilience in Louisville is also in focus. The crash has triggered reviews of how cargo hubs integrate with surrounding industrial parks, how first responder access is managed, how evacuation zones are defined, and how alerts such as shelter-in-place notifications are issued to workers and residents. Local officials have said they will review land use planning and how industrial facilities adjacent to runways prepare for potential aircraft crashes. Some businesses have opened memorials and support funds for the families of the victims. In addition to the tragic human toll and technical investigation, this event will likely feature in future aviation safety literature as a case study of the cascading effects of structural failure during takeoff, the role of heavy aircraft fuel loads in ground damage, and the importance of integrated risk mitigation in cargo operations. The full transcript of the CVR and the analytical modeling by the NTSB will be scrutinized closely in aerospace engineering circles, and large aircraft maintenance programs will reference this accident when considering inspection thresholds, fatigue life predictions, and maintenance strategy for pylons and wings in older aircraft types. The crash thus stands at the intersection of many issues: aging aircraft, maintenance oversight, takeoff performance margins, industrial land use adjacent to airports, and cargo industry risk management. As the formal investigation progresses, each of these threads will be teased apart, and the findings are expected to shape policy and practice for years to come. For now, the aviation community mourns the loss of the crew and ground victims, the local region continues recovery, and the industry watches for critical lessons to emerge that can prevent future tragedies. The wreckage of Flight 2976 left behind more than a physical scar on the industrial landscape surrounding the airport. It created a long echo of uncertainty that rippled through Louisville's daily rhythm. In the days that followed, investigators erected temporary shelters around critical sections of debris to protect them from wind, rain, and human interference. Even as emergency responders extinguished persistent hotspots from the fuel-fed fires, specialists in structural engineering, metallurgy, and combustion began their detailed examinations. Each twisted scrap of aluminum, every scorched panel, and each ruptured pipe from the aircraft was photographed, tagged, and cataloged as part of a puzzle that had to be reassembled without the benefit of intact components. Residents who lived within blocks of the crash site spoke about the suddenness of the event, the deep roar unlike typical departures, the unnatural flash of fire in the evening sky, and then the wave of heat and smoke that followed. For many, the sound of the impact reverberated in a way that made sleep difficult for nights afterward. Counselors and community organizations set up support stations near the impacted neighborhoods, offering trauma assistance and legal guidance for individuals who lost property or employment because their workplaces had been damaged or destroyed. The event underscored how deeply interconnected a community becomes with the infrastructure surrounding it, especially when major transportation hubs sit embedded in populated industrial zones. Economic analysts soon began mapping the financial aftermath. Freight corridors that usually thrived with activity slowed as warehouses temporarily closed for repairs or investigation. Several small businesses located near the impact area faced costly interruptions. Some experienced lengthy delays in gaining access to their buildings due to safety inspections and environmental testing. Insurance adjusters and environmental regulators pored over soil samples and air quality readings, attempting to quantify the contamination from burning jet fuel and scorched industrial materials. The environmental evaluations were essential, not only for cleanup, but also for understanding how the crash might influence long-term land use around the airport. As these assessments unfolded, the city's leadership pressed for infrastructural improvements. Discussions emerged about reinforcing the fire suppression systems in warehouse districts bordering airport runways, revising zoning regulations, and enhancing evacuation protocols for workers in nearby industrial facilities. While these conversations were sparked by tragedy, they also represented a collective determination to rebuild stronger and safer than before. Through it all, Louisville's sense of resolve became evident in the vigils, in the community meetings, in the efforts of workers who returned to damaged facilities, and in the shared belief that lessons drawn from catastrophe can guide a more secure future for all who live and work under the flight paths of one of the nation's busiest cargo hubs. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the UPS Flight 2976 crash and what happens next? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.